This is the Daily Tech News for Friday, June 6th, 2025. We tell you what you need to know, follow up on context, and by gosh, try to help each other understand.
Today, why a court ordered OpenAI to reduce its privacy protection. Reduce?
Reduces? See, why would a court do that? I don't know. We're going to tell you. I'm Tom Merritt.
I'm Huyen now.
Let's start with what you need to know with the big story. So, let me set the table for you. The New York Times is suing OpenAI, alleging copyright infringement because of using New York Times articles in the training data for training its large language models. Now, OpenAI needs to prove that using New York Times articles in its training data is a fair use. They're not denying they're in there. They're trying to say, we had a fair use for using them, so we get an exemption from copyright infringement. To combat that argument, the New York Times is going to take several approaches, among which would be to show that OpenAI's tools can be used to reproduce their work, thus undermining the marketplace for its articles. They're going to try to show inducement, saying OpenAI knew that their tools could do that, and their users know it, and their users do it. To prove that the New York Times has asked, to prove that users do this, the New York Times has asked the court to let it look at what queries OpenAI's users make in order to see how many users make queries specifically meant to recreate New York Times reporting, right? They're like, we got to look at your data. And the court's like, okay, let them look at your data so they can see how many times that actually happens. Now, OpenAI says this is rare, but the New York Times wants to make sure. One issue is that OpenAI users can choose to delete their data so that it would not be in the data handed over to the court for review. You and I can do that. We can say, we don't want OpenAI to store this. Get rid of the data for any reason we want. The New York Times, I think reasonably, says, well, it's possible that people aware of this case might delete their requests that were meant to reproduce our content for fear of getting caught. Or maybe they just want to defend OpenAI. Whatever the reason, we need the deleted requests to be in there if we want an accurate look at how many people are doing this. So federal judge Ona T. Wang ordered to preserve and separate all ChatGPT output log data that would otherwise be deleted due to a user request, solely for the purpose of review in this case. So when I say preserve and separate, you can't delete the stuff they ask you to delete, but you can separate it from other data and keep it just for this case. You don't have to keep it for any other reason. Once the case is over, you can get rid of it, but you do have to keep it for now. She justified the measure because the volume of data deleted on a daily basis is significant, and said, it really could change the percentage of people doing this. So we need to look at the deleted data before it gets deleted. The judge did ask OpenAI to anonymize that data. It's like, we don't need to see who did it. Just need to see what was in the queries and what was in the responses. OpenAI, however, has appealed the order on the basis that it violates privacy norms and possibly makes it impossible to comply with regulations. So, for example, in Europe, under the GDPR, you have a right to be forgotten, and that requires a tech company to delete user data on request. The order applies to any user of ChatGPT's free tier or its paid plus or pro tiers, most of the API uses. It, however, does not apply to business API users, enterprise customers, or educational customers. So, Huyen, now that you got the lay of the land on what's going on here, how do you feel about this?
I don't feel great, to be honest. I don't feel great. And I keep thinking, as someone who has worked at a couple of companies that have had to abide by GDPR, it's there for a reason. And it's difficult because I think that, unfortunately, given the way that generative AI works, we don't have a lot of good tools or procedures or just any kind of clean ways of adhering to the norms that we have right now and being able to track something that I guess is that's something like this, right? Like we have to basically be peeking over people's shoulder to see what they're doing. there's not a lot of forensics for this available other than keeping data. It doesn't feel good. I understand. It's the kind of the thing where I think like, oh, well, I kind of feel okay about it in this case because they say this and say that. But I think a lot of times with things like this, especially like user privacy and data retention, it's always a slippery slope. So I don't feel great about it. I guess I don't know. I don't feel great about it. Not that I'm on OpenAI side in this case, but just doesn't feel good.
I went on sort of a similar journey. When I first saw the headline, I thought, oh, okay, this is a story we should talk about, but it's basically OpenAI required to give some data in the case. Probably not that much interesting. And then I read into it and I'm like, oh, they're saying they're overturning a privacy protection. Like OpenAI would love to keep all this data, but OpenAI makes it so that you can delete it as a kind of a concession to user privacy concerns, right? Trying to keep their privacy, keep their folks happy. So while it certainly benefits OpenAI in this particular case, it's not something that OpenAI would normally want to do. And so then I was sort of against it. I was like, I feel like this is overreach. Then I read the specific provisions that said, keep this separate. This is not for you to have. You're not allowed to use this, for other purposes while you're doing it. Segregate the data, make it available only to the court, anonymize it. I was like, all right, I'm not sure if I'm all the way back on board with the judge, but I feel like the judge did understand what they were asking and tried to balance the two competing interests, where the New York Times has a legitimate reason to say, we want to see how many people are doing this. And OpenAI has a legitimate reason to say, but there are whole laws in Europe and California and elsewhere that conflict with this.
I do agree. I think reading and hearing that, that I think care and precautions are being taken with what data. It just feels like if we lived in a perfect world from a privacy standpoint where no user data was ever retained and was on by default, and you didn't have to like opt in, have to pay for some data tier, this would not be an option. And for some reason that just bothers me is that in this case, there's the New York Times is making a reasonable request. The judge is making very reasonable positions for it. I still get stuck on the fact, and maybe this is just a little over optimistic of me or something, is that again, in a perfect world, the data wouldn't be there to begin with.
Yeah. That's a really
and so I only worry, and that's kind of just going back to my first point, is that we don't have a really good way right now of dealing with situations like this, or no precedent yet for how to deal with situations like this with generative AI and addressing like copyright concerns. So all of this is like, well, it's tempting because it gives us an avenue to address these issues. Because this case could obviously will have like ripple impacts on how it will be just another ripple in the pool, another stone causing ripples in this pool that is generative AI. So it's important. I just wish it wasn't. It just feels it's a weird precedent to set. I think is that, well, if you just happen to have the data, we can query it. But then again, sorry, it's a mess. But
it reminds me of the Apple encryption thing with the FBI.
I was thinking about that today.
Apple was able to say, like, we don't have the access to the data. You can want it all day long, but it's not there. It's on the user's device, and we don't have control over it, so we can't give it to you. And in that case, the solution was like, well, we need to force Apple to not do that, right? Which is what the UK has done, which is a whole other mess. But this is a situation where, if there was a better system where we had control over our user data, including this kind of data, then you would be trying to subpoena it from people, which would make the case harder to determine, certainly. But I wouldn't feel weird about it like I do in this case. Yeah.
Also the weird restrictions. And as you said, if GDPR didn't exist, companies would love to not have to worry about letting people be forgotten. They would have the data. So it feels like it can be, maybe this is unfair, but just knowing that life is easier when we care less about privacy concerns from an engineering perspective. I can't imagine, again, if these things didn't exist, the conversation again would be different. OpenAI wouldn't be so, wouldn't be so, diligent about adhering to laws that, allow for user data to be forgotten. But yeah, it's weird. It's weird, but this is the situation that we have.
Yeah.
And at least they are taking like the judge did make good stipulations on how the data should be used. So that makes me feel less salty. Spicy.
It's possible. I mean, not that anyone wants to go to court in Europe. It's possible that if you did go, though, Europe would say like, oh, well, a judge ordered this and there were special prohibitions and the data eventually did get deleted. So OpenAI might be okay. I think the thing that really ends up frustrating me the most about this, though, is I don't think the New York Times is going to find that many instances.
I don't think so either. This is so specific. It's so specific of, hey, like, I don't even know what a specific kind of query, like, is someone just literally asking me, hey, can you find me that New York Times article about insert subject that I wanted, which I get. But yeah, but the thing is, like, I agree with you. I don't think they're going to find a lot of that, especially since they're not applying it to like EDU or enterprise customers, where I feel like that feels actually more EDU would be more where that kind of case would take place. But that's probably also protecting like EDU usage, which is great. It's like, I get what they're doing, but that's the problem that with generative AI and this kind of like fair use or not fair use, because of generative AI and the way that the data is taken in. I feel like there's probably other ways there's other forensics that we haven't thought of that you could use to figure out, oh yeah, they did a copyright infringement that isn't so explicit, because no, that's not, I don't think that's how people would be infringing it so specifically to be like, yeah, give me that New York Times article. I agree. I don't think they're going to get a lot from this. Enterprise
and EDU, by the way, not part of this because of the way it works. The data isn't stored with OpenAI. So OpenAI, it's what you were saying earlier. Like, they don't have it. So because it's stored on the enterprise or in the educational organization.
So they can't even subpoena it.
So they just don't have it, which is why it's exempt there. And yeah, I know what the New York Times lawyers want to do. They want as many examples as possible so they can wave them around in court and say, look, they just need a couple that are egregious to try to, sway the judge. Like, look what you can do. Like, anybody could do this. And, and they're going to try to not have numbers, although the more numbers they have, the better. And even if the numbers aren't a big percentage, they can say, we found 1,000 instances, and it can sound big. And so I get why they want to do it, but I hopefully the judge will look at it and go like, I don't know, it seems pretty rare. If that's the case anyway.
Agreed. And, well, I guess we'll see how it shakes out and if they actually find anything. So, yeah. All right. Well, DTNS is made possible by you, the listener. We want to take the time to thank that Charlie Dude, Justin Zellers, Carmine Bailey, and welcome new patron, Trickster.
Yay! Trickster. Although if it's not pronounced Trickster, let us know. There's no vowels. Please. So we're just, we're
guessing.
There's more we need to know today. Let's get to the briefs.
Alphabet's Wing is expanding its partnership with Walmart to offer drone deliveries in 5 new U.S. cities. Up until now, 15 stores in Northwest Arkansas and Dallas-Fort Worth offered the service. Walmart stores in Atlanta, Charlotte, Houston, Orlando, and Tampa will also get the option soon. So there's some stipulations. Customers must live within 6 miles of the store, and items for delivery can't weigh more than a certain amount that varies depending on which Wing machines are in use. The most common Wing drone can handle up to 2.5 pounds, but new ones going to service can carry up to 5 pounds. Packages are dropped by tether onto a customer's lawn. Wing also does deliveries for DoorDash in Dallas and North Carolina.
Yeah, that kind of explains where they're doing this, because most customers need to have a lawn.
Big lawn. Also,
they're not doing this in Manhattan yet for that reason. Yeah.
Also, DoorDash drone deliveries. I honestly haven't thought of that yet with my food. Hopefully, it would be like gently late on my doorstep.
There's got to be some food they can't deliver at 2.5 pounds.
Like a soup or soup dumplings. I just can't think of anything with liquids. Oh, deep dish pizza. Sloshy.
Burrito. Certain large burritos
might be more. Pack it really tight. Like, what is it called? What do you do with babies? Swaddling it. You just swaddle the burrito and it'll be fine.
But yeah, I feel like we are on the cusp of this getting at least as common as autonomous cars, if not more common here. So, and Walmart doing it, by the way. Everyone always thinks of Amazon, even though Amazon is still in the testing phase. Like, it hasn't really rolled out this. Walmart actually doing it. So good.
It just makes so much sense. I just think because Walmart being like more of a commodity store. I mean, not that Amazon isn't, but commodity store, lots of resources. And as you said, places where people would have lawns.
Yeah.
I like it. I did have very much have like a Monty Python, the Holy Grail, and wondering whether drones could grip things by the husk. Because I was thinking of unladen swallows. I don't know.
Yes,
there's a joke there.
And unladen wings. African and European.
African and European. Austinian. Is that what Austinites call themselves? What Austinian?
Austinians.
An unladen Austinian wing.
An Austinite.
Oh. Yeah.
I lived there in the 90s. I think we said Austinite.
Austinite? Okay. So it would be Austinian.
I'll be there at the end of June. So at the end of this month, I'll ask.
Okay. Let us know.
Themselves these days. I just know Keep Austin Weird is still a thing.
Absolutely.
Tokyo's iSpace's lunar lander Resilience sadly was not resilient, and it crashed while attempting to land on Friday. It was called Resilience because this is the second attempt for iSpace. The first one also crashed. A preliminary analysis identified the laser for measuring altitude may have failed. They're still looking at everything to see if that was the cause. Resilience had flown on the same SpaceX rocket with Firefly Aerospace's Blue Ghost, which had become the first private entity to successfully land an object on the moon in March. Another private entity tried to land something between then and now and also failed. The next attempt for iSpace is a larger lunar lander. Maybe that'll make it easier. That one is launching in 2027.
It's still, maybe in 2025, I've just been so in your, warped perception from social media, but it also just makes me feel sad that their next chance is in 2 years. I know this, maybe that's like a reasonable time, especially for aerospace. Like us mere mortals have maybe like a specific like view on time, and aerospace works a little bit differently, but that makes me incredibly sad that it's so ironically named. That's just sad. But also that, like aerospace takes time.
It does. Getting to the moon is complicated still. So, I think what struck me about this story is we have this many attempts, even if they're not all working, and eventually they'll work, and then the moon's going to have a traffic problem. All these lunar landers.
Well, Google said version 139 of Chrome is now 10% faster than it was in August 2024, according to Speedometer 3.0 browser benchmarks. Chrome 139 is available in the dev channel. The improvements include better cache management, refined data structures, and some memory optimization. Yeah,
and they didn't talk about any other browsers, which made me suspicious, but most of the places I looked, the benchmarks were equal or better than other browsers out there. So I'm surprised they're not touting that more as well. Apple's Worldwide Developers Conference kicks off Monday. There's no shortage of information about what to expect. In fact, Nika Monfort is going to be on the DTNS live stream, which is on Friday afternoon. So if it's after Friday afternoon, you can go find it on demand, talking about what to expect. And of course, Monday we'll find out when they actually do the Developers Conference. One thing most of the previews agree on is that you won't hear a lot about Apple Intelligence this time, and that Apple is falling behind in the race to capture the AI market. However, longtime Apple analyst Gene Munster believes Apple has 2 years before it even needs to start worrying. He makes the argument that Apple users have an average of 1.7 devices and use 1.5 Apple services. So it's not easy for an Apple user to leave the ecosystem because they're kind of, worked into it that way. They need a compelling reason if they're going to give all that up. And so far, none of the AI capabilities released by competitors are perceived as must-haves yet. OpenAI's hardware won't launch until next year, and even then it'll be first generation, so people will be a little skittish. And I think that's why Munster says, that would be the first time you could expect something to really challenge Apple and have people go like, oh, I have to have that. So they got some time. I honestly, I think I'm with Gene Munster on this. I think it makes sense, especially given all the churn and we're still not in a stable place, even in terms of functionality. Even now, I strongly feel how people feel about the new generation of AI assistants. And I think Apple is doing what they do best. They waited for example, with foldables, they waited until people figured out what they wanted. They waited until, to see what people liked, what they didn't like. And now they're releasing something that might not have a crease, which just sounds very compelling, even to someone like me who's
Like feels like not old hat. I like foldables, but I'm a little bit like skeptical about, what else could be done. But I think it makes so much sense like for them not to get in the fray, but just to kind of stand back, see what, was it Thunderdome? No, I can't think of the reference, but it just makes a lot of sense. And I don't think, and I think if they can release something really impactful, a lot of whatever bad press they're getting, it, will fade. I think. And not that we have long memories in tech, but it just feels like this is a good move on their part.
No, if Apple were to release the compelling thing in themselves, then all of this goes away, right?
Yeah.
Because everybody wants that, and then no one cares that they took a while to get there. I think the concerns come when you have those inside stories of like they are arguing about what to do, or they got caught flat-footed and they weren't prepared. They're not delaying for a good reason. They're delaying because they didn't expect it. I think that makes people uneasy. But I'm with you. I think Gene Munster's right. Like, yeah, they could still catch up. Like, it's not impossible. For goodness sake, they're Apple. So I wouldn't call them dead yet on this sort of thing. I'm also not convinced that LLMs don't end up being like search engines where you just have independent providers for this sort of thing.
Yeah, that's definitely an option. Well, The Verge reports on a new tool from the nonprofit A New Social called Bounce, which lets you move an account from Blue Sky and its AT protocol to an activity pub-based service like Mastodon. The key feature, you do not lose your followers or the ability to post on Blue Sky when you do it. The new tool is built on New Social's BridgeFed, which lets you make Blue Post visible on Mastodon and vice versa. Bounce goes a step further, though, and actually uses both protocols' move functionality to shift your personal data server without disrupting anything else. In fact, your Blue Sky followers might not even realize you moved. And any follower who also bridges their account will automatically follow you on Mastodon as well. They're working on ways to let you see interactions from Blue Sky, as well as let you move the other way from Mastodon to Blue Sky.
I have definitely found more people referring to Blue Sky lately. For a while, even though everybody was like, I'm done with Twitter, I was still seeing most stuff referred to on X, but more and more I'm seeing like news articles refer to somebody posting on Blue Sky. Mm-hmm. And I love the idea that we could create a bridge between the two protocols so that you could just be on whichever one you want, but not lose anything. You also have threads interoperating with Mastodon in a similar way. There is a version of the world where you just have the micro blogging universe and everybody posts there.
I like it. I mean, I was aware of BridgeFed when I first created my Blue Sky account, and I have a Mastodon.social. And I know some folks who are still very bullish on the Fediverse encouraged me to use BridgeFed. It just wasn't there. Like the UX just wasn't there. Mm-hmm. It didn't feel like what I was hoping the Fediverse would feel. No, and there's no dispersions in that. It just like, sometimes you just need to bridge the gaps and cover the wires or smooth over the cracks. Yeah. And it feels like this is that. Like this is kind of smoothing over that user experience and just making things a little more opaque in a good way.
Make it seamless, right?
Seamless, yeah.
Yeah, I love that. Speaking of X, X just changed its terms of service to prohibit the use of its content to train large language models by third parties. X acquired XAI in March, so it will use it to train XAI, but they don't want anybody else doing that. X is also conducting a pilot program to boost content that appeals to more people. A subset of users are going to be asked what they think of a post, and they'll be given a range of options, not just, scale of 1 to 5. It'll be things like it makes a meaningful point, or I thought it was funny, or I didn't think it was funny. X will then use those responses to develop an open source algorithm that they hope can effectively identify posts liked by people from different perspectives and then be able to promote those. So not the ones that isolate perspectives, but ones that are like, oh, everybody seems to have an interest in that. The goal is to, in their words, uncover ideas, insights, and opinions that bridge perspectives.
Well, India has approved a satellite internet provider, Starlink, to offer services in India. Starlink now needs to apply for spectrum in which to operate a 3 to 6 month trial, after which it can begin offering commercial services in India.
That's a big deal. That's a big market.
A huge market.
So Starlink continuing to kind of run away with their lead in satellite internet. Physicists at MIT demonstrated a new type of magnetism that could be used to make faster, denser, and more power-efficient memory chips. The new type combines ferromagnetism, which is what is used in the kinds of magnets you put on your fridge, the big magnets, the magnets you think of when you think of magnets, and anti-ferromagnetism, which is used in compass needles and works at the micro scale, which is why you can't stick your compass up on your refrigerator because it's just not big enough of a magnetic charge. The scientists made nickel iodide in the lab that combined the spin of electrons from both those types of magnetism in one material. And then they can switch the spin by applying electricity. I highly recommend you go read the full article on this, but it's useful for something called sintronics, which is being developed as an alternative to conventional electronics. And the results are published in the May 28th issue of the journal Nature.
Oh, this is cool. So is this like a new kind of a transistor then, where the spin would be up or down, like 0 or 1?
I think with spintronics, if I understand it right, which I'm not claiming I necessarily do, but if I understand it right now, you make a bit 1 or 0 with an electric charge, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
With spintronics, you would make a bit 1 or 0 by changing the spin of an electron to be quote unquote up or down. And that's what this material does, is makes that faster and easier to manage and not use as much energy as current spintronic stuff does.
Cool.
Yeah.
That's really cool.
It's definitely one of those, you're not going to be seeing this in anything you're using today, but keep an eye on it, because it is the kind of thing that could turn into one of these days. You're like, oh, so and such came out with a spintronics based processor and it's way better. It's that kind of thing to look out for.
Making transistors look like cathode ray tubes or something now, just like an extra. Oh, that's so cool. Okay. I'll have to read that article. Well, Reuters reports that China has granted export licenses valid for up to 6 months for rare earth mineral suppliers to sell to 3 U.S. automakers: General Motors, Ford, and Jeep. Jeep's maker Stellantis got clearance for their purchases Monday. Reuters says licenses were granted to sell to a U.S. electronics firm and another non-auto company earlier. Some European auto parts makers suspended production earlier in the week because of rare earth shortages, and reportedly, Ford stopped production of the Explorer SUV for a week in May because of rare earth supply issues.
Yeah, when we talked about the auto parts makers having to suspend earlier in the week, we noted that most companies were not saying they had a problem, but this is the canary in the coal mine, and this is someone giving an oxygen mask to the canary and saying, "Don't hang in there, canary. You can make it." Oh my God.
Oh, poor canary. Let me do my job.
We're going to get you out of this coal mine alive.
Oh, gosh.
So yeah, I think this does seem like it's China softening its stance a little, saying like, we're going to give a 6-month license. We're not do it forever, but we feel positive maybe we can work something out in 6 months, and then we won't have to do this restriction anymore.
Oh, gosh. It's just, complicated, interconnected supply chain.
And really would be good if we could avoid shutdown of the auto industry.
Yes. Yes. That'd be good.
I feel like it would be. If you have feedback about anything that gets brought up on the show, get in touch with us on the socials at DTNS Show on X, Instagram, Threads, Blue Sky, and Mastodon. Even if you're bridging them, we're there on all of those. For TikTok and YouTube, you can find us at Daily Tech News Show.
We end every episode of DTNS with some shared wisdom. Today, Frozen Cusser has an interesting reminiscence.
Yeah, this is an interesting one. So, a while back, we were talking with Dr. Nikki about the spray skin that was being developed. Frozen Cusser says, "I'm still thinking about that skin spray story from a few weeks ago, and it reminded me of a song from my childhood." When do you know what he's talking about?
I have no idea.
All I could think of was the stuck-on Band-Aids commercials, but that's not spray on skin.
Band-Aid stuck on me?
Yeah.
I am stuck on Band-Aid brand, because that's not a song, though. It's an ad.
It's a jingle. It's not a
jingle.
Song.
Yeah, fair enough.
He says song. So,
song.
Yeah.
Wait, is Frozen Cusser from the U.S. or from a different...
Oh, good question. I don't know. I think so, but I don't really know. Could be U.S. or Canada. We
might need a hint, Frozen Cusser.
Yeah.
Skin space.
If only Frozen Cusser could sing it for us.
I was hoping that we would have a clip either of the song or of Frozen Cusser themselves.
If we manifest it, maybe it will appear.
Okay,
thank you,
manifesting.
Thank you, Frozen Cusser, in advance.
Well, what are you thinking about? Got some insight into a story? Well, let us know and share it with us. Feedback at dailytechnewsshow.com.
Big thanks to Frozen Cusser for contributing to today's show. Thank you for being along for Daily Tech News Show. And good news, if you want to keep up on music news, Daily Music Headlines, now available as an Amazon Flash briefing. Add it now to your Echo. Thanks, everybody. This week's episodes of Daily Tech News Show were created by the following people. Host, producer, and writer Tom Merritt. Host and writer Jason Howell. Co-host Rob Dunwood. Co-host Jen Cutter. Co-host Wen Tui Dao. Producer Anthony Lemos. Producer Roger Chang. Editor Hammond Chamberlain. Editor Victor Bognot. Science correspondent Dr. Nikki Ackermans. Social media producer and moderator Zoe Detterding. Our mods, Beatmaster, W. Scottus 1, BioCow, Captain Kipper, Steve Guadarrama, Paul Reese, Matthew J. Stevens, a.k.a. Gadget Virtuoso, and J.D. Galloway. Mod and video hosting by Dan Christensen. Music provided by Martin Bell and Dan Luters. Art by Len Peralta. Acast ad support from Tatiana Matias. Patreon support from Tom McNeil. Special thanks to our guest this week, Andy Beach. And thanks to all our patrons who make the show possible.
This show is part of the Frog Pants Network. Get more at frogpants.com.
Diamond Club hopes you have enjoyed this program.
DTNS, ever since your story a few weeks ago about regrafting skin and growing skin, I've had a song from my childhood stuck in my head, so I decided to share it with you. Skin, skin, I'm so glad that I've got skin. Although it wears and sometimes tears, there's no better way to keep my insides in. It covers my nose and it wraps around my toes, and when I eat too much it strangely grows. Deep down inside it I put lemon meringue, and on the outside I hang my clothes.